he said, I'm starting my own website and I'm taking all of our subscribers. I mean, those weren't the words he used.
Right.
But he's like, I don't want to be a partner anymore. I don't want to be your partner anymore. And he's already got this website set up, and on Monday I'm going to start publishing our newsletter to them. And I'm getting a little thinking about that. A little worked up here.
Welcome, everyone, to my interview series about human resilience and strength and internal fortitude. And I have an amazing guest here to share with you. And I'm going to introduce him, and I want to tell you why I think he's so amazing. And it's probably not what you think. So this man, his name is Jeff Walker. And Jeff Walker has all of these amazing accolades. Like, he's pretty much the guy that invented the way that we currently do email marketing. He's a New York Times best-selling author, a multi-million-dollar business, and he trains people to be multi-million-dollar businesses. And I think if you totaled up all of the money, all the people that he's trained, it's been well over $1 billion. Like, all of these things are true about Jeff, but none of them are the reason that I find him to be so incredibly interesting and why I'm so interested in interviewing him for this series. So I'm just gonna jump right in and tell you, I met him a few years ago, and over the last year, we've been getting pretty close. We've been getting to know each other really well. And occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally when he teaches, and he has a blog that he does, and he has books that he writes, and occasionally this one little nugget of his success story will come out about how early on in his career, he worked really, really hard to build business 1.0, if you will. And he's at the time, he's got a family and a partner, and he's got to make some money, and he works really hard and dedicates himself to build this business. And then something traumatic happened to it, something difficult happened to it. He just says, this really hard thing happened, and then kind of moves on. And I'm really fascinated by this because there's something about people that makes them capable of withstanding great struggle, difficulty, impact, and trauma, and then carrying on. And here's a man who carries on, who's extraordinarily generous and extraordinarily dedicated and extraordinarily successful. And I came excited to interview him because I want to ask him how. I want to ask, Jeff, what do you have inside of you that allowed you to withstand that impact and then carry on? So I guess I want to start by asking, tell me how you built that first business.
Well, the first business started out purely out of desperation. I was a stay-at-home dad. I'd been in the corporate world. It didn't go so well for me in the corporate world. It just didn't fit in. I couldn't figure it out. And my wife was getting out of school. She was with an engineering degree, and she got a job offer. And so I just walked away from the corporate world as a stay-at-home dad for a number of years. This is early 1990s when that was not a normal thing whatsoever, not normal whatsoever. And after 5 years, we were just, my wife had a good job, but it still was a one-income family, and we needed some more money, what it was. So I started publishing a newsletter about the stock market. There's a big, long story, but eventually I had a free newsletter. Eventually I came out with a paid newsletter, started selling that paid newsletter, and gradually grew the business very, very slowly.
And what was it like? So just take me back a bit. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I don't normally ask people questions about hard things, but I think it's important here because I think your story and your ability is quite inspiring. So what was it like when you first started that business to realize oh wow, I'm making money online and this business is actually working to the point where I can do things?
Well, when I started out, the story is actually very involved. I actually started this first newsletter to try to get into graduate school. My thinking was so bad. It was so bad because I basically failed in the corporate world, left it, ran away before they could fire me. Then after 5 years, I'm like, we need money. So the only thing I knew was to try to go back to that corporate world. So I thought but I had 5 years of doing nothing but changing diapers and making peanut butter sandwiches, and especially in the 90s, that I'd committed career suicide. I thought I'd publish this newsletter, I could put it on my resume, and that could help me get into grad school. I'd go to grad school for 2 years, and I'd go back to the corporate world. And then what short-circuited that was it needing some tuition money. and so I tried to sell this paid version of that newsletter. I'd never sold, I was not a salesperson. I was not a marketer. I had no experience. I'd never sold anything outside of a couple bags of donuts as a Boy Scout. and only 2, because one to my parents and one to my direct next door neighbors. And I was scared to go beyond the next door neighbors. The idea that someone would actually pay me for something is a revelation. That they would pay me for something that I created. So that when that first order came in for the subscription to that newsletter that I was promising, it was a watershed moment. Right. That people will actually pay me for something that I created, that there can be a value exchange, that it's not like I'm being slimy or I'm taking something from them. I'm giving them something of value, and they're going to pay me for it. So that was mind-blowing. But the thought, I did have some really crazy thinking then. I immediately gave up on the idea of grad school. I went to one class and I walked out in the middle of the class because I was like, this isn't my future. My future is, I just did this, what we now call a launch, that did $1,650. And so this is the thought I had that might have been one of the most important thoughts I've ever had. It's like, if I did that once, I could do it again and again and again. And I might even get better at it. And that's what happened.
And how did you grow that business? How did you do that? If I did it once, how did you grow that?
Yeah, so this is 1996, 1997. There was no social media. There was no way to advertise online. There was none of the tools we have. There was no podcast. There were no blogs. Google didn't even exist back then.
Right.
And so what I did was I kept on publishing that free newsletter, and I kept on publishing content on my website, which, by the way, was really hard. These days you can build a website like that.
Right.
Back then it was, you almost had to know how to code, and I didn't know how to code. But so it was just through content, word of mouth, and getting found for that content, and then getting better at marketing.
So, okay, first hard question. What happened to that business?
I actually had a partner in that business. Not when I first started that first newsletter, but once that started to go and I realized I started to build an audience, at that time, the reason I was publishing about the stock market wasn't because I was a stockbroker or I didn't have any initials after my name. I had no credentials, 0 credentials whatsoever, but I'd studied the market. And I actually I thought my future might be as a financial trader. And I had met a man online, a person online, and he became like a mentor for me in this pursuit of this knowledge of becoming a trader. I didn't have any money to actually trade because times were really tight, but I wanted to be this trader. So after I'd been publishing for about 6 months and started to build up my email newsletter list to, I don't know, maybe 500 or 600 people, and I was starting to think, wow, I can attract people, and people are coming to me, and they like reading my stuff, and I do have that tuition bill coming up. And I went to my mentor and I said, hey, would you like to partner with me? And you can basically provide this content from your 20 years of trading experience, and I'll handle everything else in the business. And he said, yeah, sure, let's do that. So we had this partnership that went from early 1997 up until one Friday afternoon in March of 2005. And I don't remember the exact day, but it was a Friday afternoon. And my partner wasn't the most loquacious person. We rarely talked. We mostly emailed, messaged, but he was really anxious to get on the phone, really anxious. He really wanted to talk to me. I'm like, okay. So it was Friday afternoon. It was March. It's a beautiful, sunny day. You know, in Colorado here, sometimes March can be just feel almost like a summer day. And it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, approximately. And I picked up that phone, and he said, I'm starting my own website and I'm taking all of our subscribers. I mean, those weren't the words he used.
Right.
But he's like, I don't want to be a partner anymore. I don't want to be your partner anymore. And he's already got this website set up, and on Monday I'm going to start publishing our newsletter to them. And I'm getting a little thinking about that. A little worked up here, because these are folks that some of them had been paying us as paying subscribers for 5, 6, 7 years, and some of them, after someone's been your subscriber for that long, you get to know them. They're almost like friends.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I will tell you that at that time, the business had started to feel old to me. I was feeling tired of it. I was, because we were publishing every single trading day of the year. There's 252 trading days per year. And we were usually publishing multiple times a day. So we were publishing 500 to 600 times a year. And after 8 years, it was starting to feel like a bit of a drag. And it was tough for me to get away, to take a vacation. I didn't have to work a lot, but I had to work every single day.
Yeah, consistently.
Yeah. But I remember him calling me up and telling me that. And I still remember where the phone was at. It was still at a corded phone. And I remember that. I was like, but I put down the phone and I actually laughed.
That's not what I expected you to say.
I laughed, and there's a little bit of bravado in that laugh, but a little bit of we were talking about this earlier today when we were hanging out, that button.
Yeah.
That button. And that was that button. It's like, okay.
I want to talk to you about that button. So one of the things that I find so incredibly fascinating about that button, that had to have been a hard moment. I mean, here it is, however many years later, you remember it was a Friday afternoon in March, and even talking about this story, like language is such an important thing. I teach this all the time to people. Your experiences will often follow your language. So just talking about this difficult moment, like it brings about difficult emotions. But I know that you didn't stop there, because I have the pleasure and opportunity to talk to you in your then hoped for future. So what I want to know is, after the hard moment, how did you access that stuff inside that helped you keep going? Now, and I want to be clear, it's not just impressive that you kept going and built the business that you now have built and run. I want people to understand, like, just keeping going is the win. And then whatever happens, happens. Like, you could have just as easily said, you know what? I'm going to just be a stay-at-home dad and enjoy my kids. And that would have been a win. That would have been success. What I'm really fascinated in, like, that moment didn't stop you. It didn't cause you to go drinking or drugging or coping in negative ways. How did you access that button that caused you to say, this won't be the end of my story?
That's an interesting question. So first of all, I had a young family. By this time, my wife had left her job, and this business was supporting the family. So there were mouths to feed. So it's like, it just as a responsible adult, something has to happen here. That was one. Number two is I had this business and I built it for 8 years. And I knew, he supplied content, but there were times where he was gone, I wrote the content, and I did every single other thing in the business. And so I'd built it once, and I knew I could build it again. It was just so intuitively obvious to me that I had spent 8 years building these chops, and I'd gotten pretty darn good at it. And so it was just, that's why I laughed. I was like, okay, you think you're gonna go do this. I know what it takes to run a business. You've been writing a couple hundred words for me to take and turn into a product. I mean, there was a competitive piece to me. It's like, yeah, you think you're the star of the show. Let's see who's the real star of the show.
Right.
So there's a little bit of that, of like, I don't know if you would call it like a negative or just proving him wrong. But then there was also this feeling of, I can go back and I can rebuild. I can build what I want to build.
So this is a bit of an unfair question because I'm going to ask you to go back in your memory.
Right.
But
because I'm completely aware that what I've just said to you might have been a significant whitewashing of what I was really feeling. So
Right. So do you remember the first clue you got that confirmed I'm right? Like, do you remember what the first indicator was, the first piece of evidence?
So this all happened in 2005. And in 2003, I had gone to a marketing conference, the first marketing conference I'd ever been to. And at that point, I started meeting people, and I came to realize that I had these chops that most of the people on stage didn't have. I'd been networking with a number of these people in the sort of the early days of the online business building, entrepreneurship, marketing. And just in building those connections with them, I realized that I had real chops. I was ready to move on at that moment. I was like, I've got this. I know how to build. I've done it once. There's just no reason I can't do it again.
How did you do that? And I know that's kind of an unfair. How did you access that in that moment? I think true, brilliance of resiliency is knowing how to access it at the moment at which you need it. Mm-hmm. How did you do that?
I think the initial spark was the I'm going to prove you wrong.
Right.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
So to me, the thing that stands out that you just said, and I just want to make sure I heard it right, is even though you had that, I'm going to prove you wrong, it was not easy. It didn't happen in an instant. It took you had to do some things. It took some action orientation, but it happened.
Yeah.
But it happened. It didn't happen in a snap where it wasn't easy, but it did happen.
Yeah, no, it was a process. And I mean, that phone call is the first piece. And then a few weeks later, he files suit against me. Takes the business and then files suit. It's for the pieces that he couldn't take. But there is another, I forgot about this piece of the story so this was all in the second half of March. But in April, I was actually going to speak at a marketing conference. Just because I'd been to these marketing conferences and I'd gotten to know some of the people and they'd heard my stories and they realized I had some chops. So they said, come and speak. And I agreed to speak at this. I think it was the later April. So maybe a month later. And I'm like, okay, well, now this thing I was just going to go do because it's, it seems like it might be fun to get on stage. Now I want to be a little more strategic about that. And that was actually the kickoff of everything, because I actually went on stage and I gave the best talk I could and worked on that talk. And at the end of the talk, I made an offer. I said, hey, I just told you how to launch these things the way I've been launching stuff. If you're interested, I'm going to take a small group of people and work with them on their launches to teach them how to do it. So I think I had that, I'm going to prove you wrong. And then it's I went into planning mode right away.
I love that. So let me tell you why, for me, this is so exciting and interesting. I work as a psychotherapist primarily and have been for 15 years. And I would often tell my friends and colleagues, I feel like I have the best job in the world that has this one little horrible nugget to it. And that is I watch people do amazing things. Like people go through a trauma, like sexual assault, significant mental health diagnoses and issues, and they stay in the fight. They keep going, and then they overcome these challenges, and they get that job, or they marry that partner, or they achieve some level of joy, happiness, and peace in their life. And because of confidentiality, I can't tell them. I can't go tell the world, this is what humans are capable of. Mm-hmm. And I literally have goosebumps listening to you talk, because it's this is what humans are capable of. And I'm not just talking about like the bazillion-dollar business and all those things. I'm talking about like I imagine if I had asked you, if I was there in the room when you got that phone call, the drive was to provide for your family. I would guess. If I said, Jeff, what do you need right now? You'd say, man, I need money to provide for my young family. And like, this is what humans are capable of. Like every single one of us is capable of taking a blow and going into planning mode, taking action steps, being strategic, following through, recognizing it's not going to be easy, recognize it's not going to come quickly. But all of us are capable of this. Now, I would love to say all of us are capable of bazillions of dollars and all these things. And I'm happily going to tell you some of you are. But all of you are capable of like staying in the fight a bit. Right?
And every one of us is gets those blows.
100%.
Every single one of us.
100%. So if you could say, and I know you spend most of your time talking to online marketers, but just like talking to people, if you could talk to that person out there that they just got that blow, like they just found out their partner's having an affair, or they just found out that their kid has been removed from the third school because they're continuing to bite other kids, or they went to work, the job that they've had for 17 years and just got told that you're not necessary anymore. If you could say something to that person to let them know that they have that stuff inside of them too, what would you say?
So I've been around a lot of successful people now in the last, what's one of my joys, the joys of my life is I get to hang out with people that have really taken those blows and been able to turn it around. And I think for me, whenever I'm faced with a really difficult situation, I try to look around and find someone who was in that same situation, who was even more challenged than me, who had even greater challenges than me. And my thinking is like, if they did it, I can do it. I can do it. You know, because there's always someone that's in, no matter how dismal your situation, there's always someone that's been there, but they didn't have any legs, or they were blind, or they're, you know, there's always, and if other people, I mean, the human spirit can be indomitable.
If there is one thing I want people to get from watching this video series as it continues and evolves and we have more guests, it's that the human spirit is indomitable. Like we were talking before, just kind of chatting as we were setting up here, that my personal hero is Nelson Mandela. And the reason he's my personal hero is he went to prison for 27 years. And when he came out of prison, he ran for president of the country of South Africa and won. And I often think about like exactly what you just said, like there are always people in more difficult, dire situations. And I think, how did he do that? Like what must have been going through his mind every single night for 27 years when he went to bed that would allow him to hold on to the belief that he would be able to affect change?
I think what I just said is if someone else did it, I can do it. I'm not saying that from an area from ego, but from inspiration. I think if you can look at other people and take inspiration from their achievement versus go into envy, I think that's like the killer skill for becoming successful.
You know, Jeff, so like I said, I've known you now for a couple of years, but I feel like we've been getting to know each other a lot better in the past year or so. And again, I get goosebumps even thinking about this. I think people watch you strategically. Like they watch you to get your tactics. And you're generous and you teach those tactics. Like if you want to do a launch, do these things and your launch is likely to be successful. And I think that's great that people watch you tactically and strategically. I'm not sure enough people watch you inspirationally enough. Because for me, I find that incredibly inspirational that no matter how positive the outcome was, like you had challenges just like everyone else. In some cases, even probably more so than everyone else. But you had that internal ability to keep moving forward. And I would argue like that's why you're here. product launch formula wouldn't exist had you given up with, the big body blow or
Right.
blows that you took back then.
Yeah.
I think you could be that for other people. So it's not just your tactic and strategies I want people to follow. Like, it's your heart and your mindset that allows you to hold on to confidence and belief. And again, not confidence that it's going to work, but confidence that I can take one more step.
Right. Confidence that I can figure it out one step at a time.
Yeah, like that.
When so it went, like I said, he filed a suit. I'd never talked to a lawyer in my life at that point. I had never, ever talked to a lawyer in my life. And all of a sudden, like, I had some buddies and they're like, oh, you better talk to a lawyer. And I'm like, I don't even know how you even do that. So I had someone recommend a lawyer, and then it got moved to federal court because he's in a different state. And all of a sudden I'm like on the phone talking to 3 lawyers at one time and just thinking, this is costing me $900 an hour. And it's like, and it was so stressful every time I talked to those lawyers. And I mean, it was a hard time. Like I said, I laughed because I knew. I put down that phone and I laughed. I'm like, okay. I had a few words that I don't want to. I'm presuming it's a family show. Family show. But like, okay. You think you're the star. You think you're the man. Let's see. And then I remember talking to one of the lawyers, and one of the lawyers, she's like, okay, when you're talking to me, I want you to take this moment and all those feelings and just put that in a box. It's like, she's like, I know this is stressful, just put that in a box, and that's gonna be your little stressful box when you talk to me and when you have to deal with this law stuff, but just leave it there and take the rest of your life away from that box. Because it was crazy. I remember the next year, so this is the less inspirational, this is the more spiteful Jeff. A year later, and by a year later, my business was 3 times the size of that original business. And I remember mentioning to my lawyer, I'm like, I think I want to send my ex-partner, I want to send her my tax return. She's like, that's not a good idea, don't do it.
It's okay to be inspirational and human, Jeff. You can be both. That's funny. That's totally funny. But, I think that's the lesson, right? I want people to watch people like you, and in this case, specifically you, and think if he could do it, I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you're remarkably special. I genuinely believe that. You are one of the most generous people I've ever met, and oftentimes have no reason to be generous. Like, really remarkable generosity is when you do something for someone that couldn't do something for you. But simultaneously, you have the same ingredients inside of you that everybody else does. You just had the ability to access them at the point with which you needed them. And I hope by sharing that story, people watching would think to themselves, if he could dig deep in that moment when this body blow happened, maybe I could too.
I think the reason that when people find me inspirational, the reason they do is because I am so completely average. I mean, this empire that I've built, this business that I've built, is now 50 times bigger than that original business.
Right.
50. And I've had that best-selling book, and I had all these people. I've been able to help so many people, impact so many people, but I'm just so freaking average. I mean, there's just like, if you would have went back, and no one would have bet on me. No one would have ever bet on me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, but in your averageness is extraordinary. Because this is going to sound weird, Jeff, but yes, you're average, meaning I'm just like everyone else. But what made you extraordinary is you could push the button when necessary, just like everyone else could. And sometimes, as you already said, we need to know that it's possible. My favorite story about possibility, Roger Bannister, it's a very interesting thing. I think Roger Bannister is a lesson Like I'm going to call it the Jeff Walker lesson right now. What Roger Bannister did is he wanted to run a 4-minute mile. So he got a friend in England to time him, and he ran and failed. But he failed within seconds, and he knew I can shave that time off of my time. And at that time, no one had ever done it before, ever. Actually, like scientists thought the human body couldn't move that fast. Like the human body couldn't take in enough oxygen and burn enough fuel to move the body that fast for that duration of time. But Roger Bannister knew I could shave a couple more seconds off my time, and then he tried again a few weeks later, and he successfully did it. First time, human history, anybody had ever done it. Since he did it, 20,000 people have done it too. What changed? They knew it was possible.
Right.
It's the only thing that changed is the subsequent 20,000 people had an open door with which to run through because Roger Bannister showed it was possible.
I think in the 1 year after Bannister did that, I think it was like 20-some people.
Yeah.
So forever, for 10,000 years, or from when timekeeping started, which I don't know when that was, so, since there was no 4-minute mile for time immemorial, and then one man does it, and then all of a sudden 20 people can do it in the next year.
Right. And
100% right there.
And that's why I'm so excited to like introduce people to like the man that did it. And again, I'm not talking about launches and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not excluding that either, but just was able to wake up the next day and say, all right, game on. I'm gonna take steps towards rebuilding and just discover what that looked like. And I'm sure at that time you wouldn't have known that it would be 50 times bigger. But what you did know is I'm going to figure some things out, and I think we're all better for it. Yeah. I think we're all better for it. Now, Jeff, you did not ask me to do this, but being a fan, I have to say, I'm going to tell a quick story on how I came into your world and how your generosity touched me. So I told you, I remarked about Jeff a couple times through this as a New York Times bestselling author, and I was really struggling in my professional life. I had a private practice and I was seeing a bazillion people, but it was impacting my health. I was going to my office at 10 a.m. and working until 10 p.m. and then going home. And it wasn't good for my family. It wasn't good for my health. It was really, really difficult. We have a mutual friend that introduced me to your work, and I read your first book, Launch, and it helped me figure out that I could transition to doing things online and gave me a process with which to do it. And it just so happens that around the time of this interview, and again, I asked him, do you want me to say anything? He said, no, but I'm breaking the rule because it just so happens around the time of doing this interview, your second edition of that book has been released. And if you guys want to experience this man's generosity, kindness, wisdom, and inspiration, it's in this book. You can get it Amazon and every place you can buy books. And if you enjoyed this interview, you probably will enjoy this book. And if you're looking to be empowered, and maybe you're going to be empowered to do a launch, or maybe you're going to be empowered to just be a little bit more of a better version of yourself, because there's awesome case studies in here of people just figuring out how to be better versions of them. I think this is a good book for you.
You mentioned Nelson Mandela, and a couple decades. Thank you.
Yo,
Thank
you're
you
welcome.
for that.
I mean it.
But decades in prison, came out and became president. But to me, becoming president wasn't the achievement. It was coming out with the generosity of spirit that he had, where he could knit a nation together that had incredible strife.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more.
And it's that, that generosity of spirit is just incredibly inspiring to me. And if I could bring any piece of that.
Yeah, and I mean it. Like when I say you're one of the most generous people I've ever met, with your time and with your knowledge. Tell me the biggest launch that someone has done financially from buying your book.
There have been many. The first one that leaped out to me is Dylan Frost And his launches, I think the first one he did, got just from the book, I think his first launch was about $100,000. And then he's progressed from there, and he's done $1 million launches.
So I bring that up. This is actually my copy of the book, by the way, so you can't have it. But I bring that up because we were just talking about generosity. In this book is like everything on how to do that. And a lot of times books in the business world, and I'm just speaking to like how important that generosity is. A lot of times books in the business world are kind of like a literary sales pitch. But you can literally spend $20 on this book and have a $10 million business. Or 100, or you can.
And that's not typical or average or anything like that.
No, but my point, like you can have whatever it is you want to have, and that's because of you really are such a generously remarkable person, and I think the evidence is in the outcome of your students. Which again, I don't want you guys thinking about financially. I want you thinking about life. Like I know people in the launch world that are so happy that they get to do launches. And they make a few hundred extra bucks per week, but that allows them to pay for their kids' extracurricular activities, and they're as happy as can be. And I know people in the launch world making 8 figures, and it's because of how willing you are to share this stuff for $20. Mm-hmm. So I don't just advocate for people to buy this if you want to do launches. I mean, if you just want to just think differently about your life, getting the knowledge from this guy that you would get in this interview and then hopefully in his brand new book, I think would be life-changing. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.